Welcome to the Native News Online live stream. My name is Valerie Vandepan, and I am the managing editor of Native News Online. And I am here with publisher and editor Levi Rickert. And joining us is Bekah Hinojosa. She is an artist, an organizer. She's from the Rio Grande Valley of Texas, and she serves as Sierra Club's Gulf Coast campaign representative. She works with communities across the Texas coastline to stop crude oil exports terminals, pipelines, and liquid natural gas export terminals that are harming Native communities and communities of color across South Texas. I met Bekah this last week at the Society of Environmental Journalists Conference, where she spoke on a panel about plastics and liquid natural gas. And there were a couple of great things about that panel. A lot of it had to do with what Bekah had to say specifically with how those industries are harming Indigenous communities. Bekah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great to meet you at the conference.
Awesome. Before we start talking about the evils of fossil fuel industry and how they're killing everything, do you want to share a little bit about what you thought of the conference or what some of your biggest takeaways were?
I haven't been to an in-person conference in a really long time, so just because of the pandemic. So that was incredible, just meeting people face to face. And I joined like an informal toxic tour to see a bayou in Houston that people are fighting to protect, that also has a Superfund site. And I heard a lot of really incredible panels. One really important panel about how journalists can work better with communities that are frontline communities of color facing environmental justice impacts. So it was great meeting you and a ton of other people.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. The conference is about, I think there were about 1,200 people there, but 700, 800 journalists, and then a couple hundred industry professionals and experts and lobbyists and tech people, and it was quite the scene.
Yeah, really wonderfully diverse conference.
Yeah.
Becca, Valerie came back. She was really excited about the conference, and I just want to hear what was your biggest takeaway. We hear so much about climate change and how real is it? Do you feel like the general public really doesn't pay attention, or what's your take on it?
Yeah, I think my biggest takeaway is how people can, especially journalists, can work with frontline communities, community members that are directly impacted, that are facing toxic pollution every day, and how research journalists can help lift up the cause, um, and not only shine a light on their stories, but do it in a way that's not extractive, that's not overburdening communities of color, um, and in a way that really probes the people in power who are responsible for these injustices, these atrocities happening in these communities. There was a really incredible panel that was led by Antonia Yuhas that really focused on that. Also had other community members, including Juan Paras, who's with Texas Environmental Justice Advocacy Services. So, I mean, that was a really, really important panel, in my opinion, and really, spoke to me and the issues that we face in the Rio Grande Valley, where, we're directly impacted people. There are a ton of reporters, in the RGV, and just the need to have those deeper relationships with news media that are, just really looking at the entire scope and history, the deeper issue of what's going on, the root of the problems.
Hey, speak to our audience here at Native News Online about how many tribal people, tribes are down in Texas. I know the last census really indicated that we have a significant amount of Native Americans in Texas. So, do you deal with a lot, or you come in contact with many, or?
I worked with the Carrizo Comecrudo Tribe of Texas. They're the original native people of the region that I'm based or from, the Rio Grande Valley. Um, they have leadership and community members all over Texas. And I work with them, to oppose fossil fuel extraction and also SpaceX, because where these, industries are building is on sacred native sites, on sacred lands of the Carrizo Comecrudo Tribe of Texas.
So it's interesting that you bring up SpaceX because one of the tours I did was led by a person from the American Bird Conservatory in
Oh, okay.
Washington, D.C., and they do a lot of work conserving birds. And his whole thing was SpaceX is killing birds in Texas, endangered species of birds in Texas. And from his perspective, uh, Musk should be spending his resources and money in Texas, preserving the land and protecting the land instead of destroying it further to get to another planet, just to destroy that planet too. He was pretty passionate about it. Um, so talk a little bit about what SpaceX is doing on the Carrizo Comecrudo land and on their sacred sites. And yeah, speak a little bit to specifically SpaceX.
Sure. I mean, SpaceX is, more than just explosive rockets, although that's terrible. Having, we see rocket explosions very frequently in our community. Elon Musk has a SpaceX launch pad on Boca Chica Beach, which is Brownsville's beach. And very frequently, SpaceX is testing rockets. They're blowing up rocket pieces into the wildlife refuges because they built this launch pad sandwiched in between an international wildlife corridor, meaning that there's wildlife refuge to the north, to the side, adjacent to this launch pad, and rocket parts are just blowing up into those wildlife refuges, blowing up into the Gulf of Mexico, landing into communities in South Padre Island, Boca Chica Village. So it's a highly flammable, destructive project, and even more than that, there are other issues with the launch pad. SpaceX is planning a major expansion that would include, drilling for gas on the beach. And they plan to use that gas for rocket fuel. They plan to build their own LNG plant, which is, just extremely toxic, very toxic processing method. They also plan to build a desalination plant. I mean, it's a whole complex. And I'm talking about just the launch pad itself, but there's a whole other, you know, issues from that industry moving into our community, into our low income community of color, indigenous community. And that is the issues of gentrification, the issues of rising house costs, um, and, just the fact that this means a whole private space industry moving into a low income community, and completely just changing our way of life potentially.
Wow. So just for our viewers, LNG is liquid natural gas, and that's the what the acronym stands for. And so they're literally doing all this in this community. So they're harming wildlife, they're changing the landscape, and they think they haven't started taking the liquid natural gas from the beach yet, or they're planning to, or, like,
So
where
they're
are they with this process?
Yeah, they're SpaceX is trying to take over an old drilling lease, and we haven't had drilling in our county since 2014. So it's been a long time since any industry has come in to drill for gas. So SpaceX would be the first one in a while, and they're planning to take over an existing drilling lease and then start vertically drilling to extract methane to use for fuel for rocket ships. So, very, very destructive process on a pristine beach.
Who regulates these people who want to extract the energy, oil or whatever? Is it the state, the federal EPA, or who regulates them?
So in Texas, it's the Texas Railroad Commission, which has nothing to do with railroads, although
Railroad, come
they
on.
refuse to change their name, but they oversee oil and gas permits and some pipelines. A lot of the oil and gas industry in Texas is regulated by the Texas Railroad Commission.
That's
And
very
and
interesting.
and the way Texas functions is that they pretty much rubber stamp approvals for, for anything oil and gas related in Texas.
Wow.
So also, it's my understanding that with mineral rights in Texas, you could own the land or the land could be yours, but the mineral rights and the right to extract those minerals from the land actually resides with the state. Is that true? And can you speak a little bit to that as far as land rights?
Right. So, a lot of big fossil fuel corporations, own, the minerals beneath you. And, a lot of landowners just own the first top part of the topsoil. So a lot of times you'll see like, you know, a really big drilling operation taking place in a community because some industry has bought out the mineral rights underneath. And I used to live in North Texas at one point for college, and I mean there was fracking and drilling near hospitals, schools, and a park, and it's because some fossil fuel industry owned those mineral rights and were allowed to get away with that.
So, how is liquid natural gas adding to this whole SpaceX mess down there?
Right. So I talked about, how there's opposition to SpaceX, highly flammable rockets. Well, in that same general area within 6 miles, there are also these two proposed LNG export terminals. And just to reiterate, LNG stands for liquefied natural gas. And what it means is that these two LNG plants would process gas uh, and take in gas extracted from West Texas and the Permian Basin, from the Eagle Ford Shale, gas that's fracked, and then pipe it all the way to these LNG export terminals, which are proposed in our community. And then there, this huge operation that spans like almost 2,000 acres would take in the gas and process it and take that gas from a gas state to a liquid. So they would add all these chemicals and supercool it. And they do that in order to load it on these massive tanker ships and export larger quantities of gas overseas. So, these are massive LNG export terminals are massive storage tanks, processing operation, flare stacks, pipelines, tanker ships, highly polluting industrial complex that wants to build, within 6 miles of SpaceX. So if you can imagine, exploding rockets next to large tanks of gas is extremely dangerous.
So, and also just to like clarify too, like the reason I think liquid natural gas is so important to the global economy right now is the boom in single-use plastics. They're using this liquid natural gas to make plastics. Is that correct?
That's partially true. It's also uh, they plan to export it to, reburn it in other countries, um, and use it for fuel.
Hey, Becca,
Plastics.
we have a question from one of our viewers, and I think it's a good one. It says, is it possible for SpaceX to reside peaceably within and among Native American communities?
It's a highly explosive industry. Um, I mean, they're destroying wildlife habitat. They're not able to control where they're blowing up rocket pieces. There's the issue of gentrification, and their workers are already displacing our local people. SpaceX has proven time and time again that they are an irresponsible and dangerous neighbor.
Well said. So I think a lot of times the industry frames the problems with the environment as a consumer problem. And consumers also, to a greater extent, think that they're responsible and, oh, we just need to buy a Tesla or we just need to recycle more or we just need to do those kinds of things that are marketed to them as consumers, right? As people who buy things. Um, but I think the policymakers, the ones that are letting SpaceX, for example, blow things up and letting liquid natural gas tanks go in next to where they're blowing things up, um, there's a responsibility that is being eschewed, I think, from politicians. Can you speak a little bit to what can be done? Like what are our options in this space?
I mean, we need energy efficiency. We need, renewable energy for low income communities of color, on site energy efficiency, solar panels, wind. We need a true investment in a transition away from a fossil fuel economy. Um, you know, we need actual investment to help transition people out of these dangerous workforces. Things like the oil and gas industry, people have to work on offshore oil drilling pads. They need investment, they need support, they need help to transition to a job that's safe for them and their communities. Um, and a lot of the solutions we see are essentially greenwashing, green capitalism, things that don't directly help or support marginalized communities of color, who instead just continue to face more and more of the brunt of these types of industries. So, where you see Tesla manufacturing plants in Texas, people are starting to speak out. And workers there have also spoken out about, racism in the workplace. There's been union busting. Um, People need safe, good jobs, and even those industries have proven that they have issues, and they are also harming the community in another way.
Wow. It's kind of depressing. So, so energy independence, good jobs. What can like how do you stop these things? Like, how are people organizing? And is there things that we can do to support the groups organizing in South Texas?
Right. Well, first of all, LNG is not going to benefit our community in any way. LNG is just a big multi-million dollar fossil fuel corporation that wants to, build on our land, and we would get the pollution, and then they would just profit. So it doesn't benefit our community. So just keeping that in mind, supporting local efforts, supporting the Carrizo Comecrudo Tribe, speaking out against, LNG, against SpaceX. I would definitely encourage people to follow them and offer your support. They do take donations. There are also, other groups in the Rio Grande Valley. I'm happy to send a list, but I definitely want to highlight the Carrizo Comecrudo Tribe and continue to stay involved. We often ask for people to sign petitions or speak out and pressure those in power responsible for these polluting industries like LNG and SpaceX.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Is there anything you want to add or that you want to let people know about before we end our conversation today?
Yeah, just that, we are actively fighting these two LNG terminals. They're called Rio Grande LNG and Texas LNG. They haven't built anything yet, they're just proposed. So please keep watching the work we're doing. Offer your support online. And also, SpaceX is planning a major expansion right now, and that decision might come soon from the regulatory agencies that have the authority to issue permits. So also keep watch, around SpaceX, because we'll have ways for people to take action.
Wonderful. We'll definitely send that list and we will post the extra information to our social channels.
Thank you
And
all so much.
Bekah, thank you very much on behalf of Native News Online. You've been an excellent guest, and this information is very overwhelming. So thank you very much. Very, very pertinent to the crisis that exists in the world today. So, Chi Miigwech.
Thank you all. You all take care.
Thank you,
Appreciate you.
Becca. Very much appreciated. And thanks y'all for watching us online.